Welcome to this presentation hosted by the Office of Student and School Success. My name is Sue Cohn, and I serve as Policy and Research Coach for the office. Before our colleague, Janine Butler, begins her presentation, we thought it important to provide some background on the use of interim benchmark assessments. This slide includes several important points about both interim assessment blocks, or IABs, and this recorded presentation. As noted on the slide, IABs are one of multiple assessments used by educators to inform instructional decisions and action planning. While this presentation focuses on IABs, we encourage teachers and teams to use a variety of assessment data to monitor student progress toward learning targets and standards. Several comparisons between IABs and summative Smarter Balanced assessments are also listed on the slide. As noted in the second bullet, IABs use a fixed format rather than the computer adaptive format used on the SBA. The fixed format means that the same set of items are always used on a specific IAB, while the computer adaptive format of the SBA adjusts difficulty of questions throughout the assessment based on a student's response. Additionally, as noted on the slide, the IABs provide 3 reporting categories rather than the 4 reporting categories provided on the SBA. Reporting categories for IABs include below standard, near standard, and above standard. The slide also describes the overarching purposes for the Office of Student and School Success in recording this presentation. These include moving the conversation forward around the use of IABs in instructional decisions and action planning, emphasizing the importance of aligning curriculum, instruction, and assessments to state standards and learning targets, and finally, continuing to build educator knowledge and skills around assessment literacy. The presentation, hosted by Janine Butler, Leadership Coach, will now begin.
Welcome to this presentation hosted by the Office of Student and School Success. My name is Janine Butler, and I serve as a Leadership Coach at Priority and Focus Schools in our state. This presentation is part of a suite of modules designed to support coaches, leaders, and staffs to use various sources of data to inform decision-making. I invite you to go to our website to view additional modules. A case format study will be used to guide coaches through the process of using Smarter Balanced interim assessment blocks to progress monitor student growth towards state standards and to identify instructional practices that are implicated by the assessments to increase student growth outcomes. We suggest you have your WACAP login and password and other data you and your team are using for progress monitoring student growth with you during this presentation. You can also stop this slideshow at any time in order to reflect on coaching questions. This brings us to the problem of practice and associated learning targets we would like to address in this module. Our school and district leaders and staffs have an abundance of data available to them. However, one of the problems of practice for educators and coaches is knowing how to systematize the use of all this data to progress monitor student growth toward the standards and to make instructional real-time day-to-day adjustments to ensure high levels of student growth. Specific learning targets are outlined in the next 2 slides, and the viewer is invited to read over the intended outcomes of this module. We will also revisit these learning targets at the end of this presentation. Additionally, during this presentation, I'll pose questions for you and your team to consider. You may pause the presentation at any time to consider your team's responses. It is important to start with the definition and purpose of progress monitoring used for this presentation. As cited in many resources related to response to intervention, RTI, and multi-tiered systems of support, MTSS, progress monitoring serves to determine if the instructional program is effective, identifies students not making progress, and helps guide what instruction those students need next. And although we often think of progress monitoring as a key element in RTI MTSS, it actually reflects effective instructional practice in analyzing student progress for each and every student within any classroom. Therefore, progress monitoring using Smarter Balanced interim assessment blocks serves to evaluate the effectiveness of our curriculum and instruction and identifies student-specific learning needs so that they receive explicit instruction that will result in growth toward Washington state standards. The case studies used in this module will reveal that the use of smarter balanced interim assessment blocks can contribute to several other initiatives and practices currently underway in Washington State schools. The quote on the next slide illustrates the impact of interim assessment blocks from an 8th grade teacher's perspective. I will use 2 middle schools I coach in a case study approach in this presentation. They are both located in medium-sized districts and both have many staff members who have worked in the school for more than a decade. The data on this slide represent OSPI demographic averages for these schools over the past 5 years. As you can see, the 2 schools have very different student populations and represent different reasons for why they are in improvement. What contextual data did you and your team review this fall? How did a knowledge of those data impact goal setting or coaching moves? A concept basic to Common Core and Smarter Balanced Assessments, known as the Depth of Knowledge, or DOK, is a necessary and foundational understanding for progress monitoring student growth toward standards and using those data to inform our instructional decisions tomorrow. I share the attached slide with all teams to make sure we share the same understanding of DOK and can make a direct connection to smarter balanced results. For example, when we reviewed our disaggregated data in School B in the online reporting system, we could see, according to the bottom bar shown in this slide, that 60% of our IEP students were in Level 1 and wondered if they may be stuck in Level 1 thinking. A key question I asked was, as we look at these 2 slides together, what might be some instructional strategies we can put into practice tomorrow to begin moving our IEP students from Level 1 to Level 2 thinking, and move their results from the red bar to the yellow or green bar? In School A, we linked this depth of knowledge activity to our AVID initiative, as well as to our instructional framework regarding cognitive complexity. Where is your school in its understanding of the foundational role of depth of knowledge in Common Core and Smarter Balanced Assessment? Based on this analysis of your school or school teams, what could be your next coaching or leadership move around this understanding? As I worked with School A, the one with high ELL and migrant populations, in using the online reporting system in August, we saw that 7th grade math had the lowest area of performance. We then went deeper into the online reporting system to review our 7th grade math target report to discover areas of celebration and areas where improvement was indicated. This slide describes our ORS target report for 7th grade math. As the slide indicates, the math team decided that expressions and equations needed to have a focus, and luckily, it was also the next unit to be taught by 7th grade math teachers. Through ongoing discussions, teachers realized they were focused on teaching to the math text rather than to the standards. They also recognized they needed to fully understand what these targets meant and what they looked like. What targets should be celebrated in your school? What targets need improvement? After reviewing your school's SBAC target report, what might be your next coaching move? In order to get more detail on expressions and equations, we went to the Smarter Balanced Assessment Design and Development section to review the actual item specs. The link to the Smarter Balanced item specs will be shown on the bottom of this slide. They are accessed via the Assessment and Design and Development drop-down menus. First, as shown on this slide, the item specs help the math team understand the construct vocabulary needed for each target. This also supported their initiatives with English learners and AVID, as well as with the instructional framework with regard to academic language acquisition. How might knowing the construct-relevant vocabulary and progress monitoring inform your next coaching move with your particular school? Next, the math teams focused on the item spec descriptors to understand what is needed to meet standard at Level 3, as shown on this slide. Item specs also clarified what it means to move students from Level 1 to Level 2, Level 2 to Level 3, and Level 3 to Level 4, as well as what questions looked like. Again, as an AVID school, where rigor is a major focus, the item specs help teachers see what students needed to move from Level 3 to Level 4. Where is your school's understanding of the standards and targets? What might be your next coaching moves in facilitating teachers' deep understanding about Levels 3 and 4? We also decided to look at the expressions and equations item specs for grades 6 through 8 as a learning progression. After reviewing the Level 3 descriptors in the item specs, I asked, what evidence are you and your students collecting to show that students are growing toward Level 3? After brainstorming all the evidence used, I asked them to revisit the Level 3 item spec descriptors and to consider, is the evidence you are collecting worthy of Level 3 work? This led to further realizations that the instructional materials and the progress monitoring assessments were only at Level 1 and 2. As you think of your next possible coaching or leadership moves using depth of knowledge and the Smarter Balanced item specs, coaching questions might include, where is your school in understanding the connection between daily instruction and progress monitoring with Level 3 and 4 work? What might be benefits of taking a look at item spec descriptors via vertical teaming? What might be some next coaching and leadership moves regarding item spec work prior to giving a Smarter Balanced interim assessment block? In this slide, you can see our November results regarding the expressions and equations block. In School A, we saw that 50% of students were below standard, 39% were at or near, and 11% were above standard. My next coaching move was to show the principal and math teams the detail we can access around our students' IAB data that can inform our practices tomorrow. When you click on the interim block you have given, you will have two tabs at top left to choose from, Performance by Class and Performance by Student. In Performance by Class, you will have access to a green column that shows the 5 questions on which students performed the strongest, and a salmon pink column that shows the 5 questions on which the students performed the weakest. In this slide, we can see the 5 questions that students struggled with the most regarding 7th grade expressions and equations. Question 13 indicates that only 7% of the students got that question correct. By clicking on that question number, we can actually see the type of question on which students struggled. Math teachers, the principal, and the leadership team began reviewing these questions, such as the example in this slide. Teachers identified possible student skill and concept deficits as well as other skill barriers, such as the ability to use the on-screen calculator or confusion about 2-part questions. Once again, teachers recognized gaps in instruction and made a commitment to look at other resources for entry and exit tasks or to drive whole group or small group instruction. Teachers also use the performance by student data, as shown on this slide, to review the pretest information of individual students below standard, including how they responded to each question. This is where the Smarter Balanced interim assessment blocks can help us make instructional decisions around RTI MTSS issues. Discussions focused in on the supplemental instruction English learners are receiving, including after-school instruction. This has become the next focus in our IndiStar plan for School A. How are we monitoring the effectiveness of our English learners' core and supplemental instruction? How might the interim assessment blocks help us monitor supplemental program effectiveness in addition to individual student growth? What might be your next coaching or leadership move after your school and teams have given an initial interim assessment block? After instruction of the 7th grade expressions and equations unit in School A, the same interim assessment block was given in January. The results of the 2 pre- and post expressions and equations interim blocks are shown on this slide. The percentage of students below grade level decreased from 50% to 39%, the percentage of students above standard went from 11% to 20%, and the percentage of students at or near increased by 2%. Although this was good news, it was still a concern that almost 40% of the students were still below standard. As a result, our next step was to focus in on our supplemental programs using the interim assessment block individual student data and to add this task to our IndiStar plan. What might be other effective coaching moves after a post-IAB is given? This slide captures what the principal and teachers had to say about their experience in giving the initial interim assessment block and the impact on not only student subgroups, but also for each and every student. Additionally, the principal used the school's website to communicate to families in the community the process of using the interim assessment blocks. He described their purpose, emphasizing they were cutting-edge work. He also shared that the interim assessments give our students practice using the Smarter Balanced tools on their computers, practicing Smarter Balanced style questions, practice answering Smarter Balanced level depth of knowledge questions, and hopefully confidence, and persistence that will help them when the Smarter Balanced assessment is finally given. The interim assessments also give teachers and students a clear understanding of how well prepared students are for the Smarter Balanced assessment and which areas they will need to focus their attention. Now we have some accurate assessments to measure our students' progress, and not only can we make adjustments in our teaching and learning to get the results we want, students are setting their own growth goals towards Washington State standards and Smarter Balanced assessments. As the IAB process unfolded, the Social Studies Department in School A decided to focus on reading for informational text and gave the IAB to all students. They presented at a faculty meeting what they learned and described instruction all teachers could use to help support students in this key area. As other staff have watched the process and the benefits, it appears the culture in School A is beginning to shift regarding the use of data. How might this process be useful for coaches and school leaders? What might be your next coaching and leading moves? Although School B has fairly strong Smarter Balanced results overall, and students with disabilities are showing significant growth on the district mid-year assessment, they continue to remain an improvement due to the lack of proficiency among special education students. As a result of new understanding about the interim assessment blocks, the 7th grade reading teacher gave the informational text assessment block as both a pre- and post-test with explicit instruction between assessments. As we reviewed and celebrated the results of the October to December informational text, IAB, in School B, we also began to question the focus on fluency over the actual reading standards. Our findings were shared with the leadership team, and it was decided to use the IABs for determining effectiveness of the intervention Power Math and Power Reading classes and other learning experiences for our special education students. As you think about your role as a coach or leader in facilitating system changes, what might be some ways to use the IABs to zero in on instructional problems of practice having to do with the subgroups that got your school into improvement? The next few slides capture what the teachers and principal had to say about their experience in giving the initial interim assessment block to students receiving supplemental reading instruction. As the principal has been drilling down into the IAB data for special education students, she has decided to support teachers in going deeper with the IABs and then ensuring that IEP students are receiving standards-based instruction. The next few slides provide additional resources that can be used in the process of using interim assessment blocks for progress monitoring. This slide shows another view of IAB data using the online reporting system by student and by blocks. More detail on how to access this view can be found in the ORS module referred to previously. Another resource can be found in the Assessment Viewing application. This is also known as AVA. This resource allows us to see the types of questions students will be asked in the IABs and guides us as to the learning experiences they need in both the core classroom and supplemental learning opportunities. Take note, you may need to turn off your pop-up blocker to gain access. After clicking on AVA, you will be able to see the many interim assessment blocks available to review. An evolving resource can be found in the Smarter Balanced digital library. Known as playlists, each one connects to an interim assessment block and provides insight as to what instruction students might need next according to their performance on the interim block. Continue to check back regularly for more resources in the digital library. IABs can support meaningful conversations with students and families. This slide describes a criterion that must be met to receive a distinguished rating for Criterion 6.2 for the teacher evaluation system. Note the importance of collaborating with students and parents. IABs support our teachers in having those meaningful conversations anchored in real-time data. We can describe and discuss students' learning strengths as well as areas in which they need more work and how that's impacting decisions for tomorrow's instruction. Teachers in both schools have begun seeing a connection between their student growth goals and using the interim assessment blocks. This has led to deeper questions and discussions such as, how can our school use the Smarter Balanced interim assessment blocks to engage our students as authentic assessment partners? What are some examples we can look at to see how teachers are using the IABs and having students chart, monitor, and reflect upon their own growth? How might this practice facilitate growth mindset for our student subgroups and for all of our students? This slide represents an aha from one teacher about engaging students in the analysis and use of interim assessment blocks. Finally, coaching and leading with the end in mind, the ultimate alignment is for the Smarter Balanced Target Report to be reflected in daily classroom teaching and learning in which students are engaged in self-reflective practices, and then having a report card that communicates progress on those very same targets. As coaches, how might we facilitate our schools in realizing the vision of Distinguished on student growth goals of 3.1 and 6.1 by utilizing the Smarter Balanced interim assessment blocks? How might we facilitate the practice of students as authentic, engaged assessment partners who develop growth mindsets? How might we facilitate the vision of alignment among standards, classroom instruction, assessment, and reporting practices? In what ways might coaching and leading for students as authentic assessment partners potentially disrupt inequitable instructional practices? We began the module with the learning targets listed on the next two slides. Hopefully you and your team have increased your knowledge about using interim assessment blocks to progress monitor student growth. We hope you will continue to revisit the discussion set forth in this presentation and realize high levels of student growth toward Washington state standards. Please contact the Office of Student and School Success for any further information. Again, thank you for your participation in viewing this module.